Continuing now on Newsmax Prime, some interesting results from the latest CBS News poll of Republican voters. According to the latest survey from CBS, 63% of Donald Trump voters say they would back Mr. Trump in a third-party run should he decide to depart the Republican Party. But when it comes to the convention in Cleveland, we talked about it last night, there are those who believe if the Donald can get to 1,100 delegate votes, he can close the deal on the first ballot, picking up the needed votes there on the floor in Cleveland. Well, let's talk to somebody who knows all about conventions and, for that matter, about third-party efforts. Let's talk to former White House Chief of Staff for President George H.W. Bush and the former governor of New Hampshire, John Sununu. John is also the author of the book, The Quiet Man, The Indispensable Presidency of George H.W. Bush. So Governor Randy Evans of Georgia, an attorney, a guy on the RNC Rules Committee, says if Donald gets to 1,100, he thinks that Trump can close the deal and win it on the first ballot. Your reaction to that theory?
Well, look, he's a supporter of Trump's. He wants to keep pushing the number down as low as possible. You got to get to 1237. You have to convince the majority of the delegates that you ought to be the nominee that we send forward to beat Hillary Clinton. And this game now the Trump people are playing, trying to shift the goal line, is ridiculous. They're trying to claim they didn't understand the rules. They're trying to claim that the process is rigged. They're trying to denigrate the Republican Party as their effort to bully, if you will, the delegates into doing something that most of the delegates right now are still evaluating.
All right. Well, we've had some people on. There have been some interesting things happening from Colorado to Chicago to other places to talk about. But let me talk more about the candidates still in the running for the nomination. Ted Cruz has been credited with a pretty good ground game, but now talk that he is really looking ahead to a second ballot. Do you think it will go to a second ballot in Cleveland?
Well, I think there's a high likelihood of a second ballot and probably a third and a fourth. This is a process. It is no different than it's ever been. Just because we have had delegates come in with clear majorities doesn't mean that the process, in case they didn't have those clear majorities, didn't exist in the past. Of course it existed. And we've had situations, not so much in my most recent years and your most recent years, but these situations have occurred many times in the past. We had 17 candidates. That divided up, if you will, early support, so there's about 7 candidates, I think, now that have delegates. Those delegates were going to have to make decisions after the first ballot as to where they're going to go. And some of the delegates that Mr. Trump has that really are there only because he won a beauty contest in their state may not stick with him. So this has a long way to go, and it's not any different than the rule structure that we've dealt with over the years.
Well, John Kasich, the convention in his home state of Ohio, is he poised to get the rule change he needs to have his name placed in nomination? Well, look, everybody that ran in this race has their own vision of what's going on. John is hanging in there. I think he personally feels that if it gets to a contested convention, an open convention, and delegates honestly start looking at who can and can't beat Mrs. Clinton, and John probably feels, Governor Kasich probably feels, that if folks start looking at the polls that indicate that Trump would get blown out, they might move over to Kasich because his numbers in head-to-head against Mrs. Clinton seem to be very strong. Well, one thing's for sure, John Sununu, it's going to get very interesting at the convention in Cleveland this summer. John Sununu, we thank you for your time. Again, John is the author of The Quiet Man, The Indispensable Presidency of George H.W. Bush. Now, what do you think of what Governor Sununu had to say? Why don't you send me your comments at newsmaxtv.com/comments or via Twitter at Newsmax Prime. Coming back to talk immigration issues.